I actually got appointed dictator for a day. What I tend to do is I believe I should default to this is a decision you should make for yourself because you're about to make the decision. There are exceptions to that. As I said, I am concerned about safety, and that's my legal responsibility. But if it's a decision of what should we do today, that was the point of my homeschooling other people's kids. Yes, let's make those decisions together. I'm going to let you make a bunch of decisions, and we may vote on them, and we may, have ways to make decisions. Actually, it was a consensus-run small group. We occasionally, by consensus, decided that a majority vote for certain decisions was going to be the way we would do things, and I did. I actually got appointed dictator for a day. That was interesting. I was
Yeah,
voted. I was
it's
by
time to vote.
consensus made dictator for a day. Which means I consented to it. But there was it was a situation in which there was one child who was very challenging, and he was behaving in ways I was like, hey, you know what? Or he was interacting with others. It wasn't just him. It was interacting with some other. There was I think 3 or 4 boys on a bus, and we were like having a challenging time. And I was concerned that we might get kicked off this bus because they were being so you
Yeah.
know loud and stuff. And so the way I said it, what I said was, if this was a regular school, this is how what I would do it, And they said, okay, let's do that. And I was like, what? And then they essentially through a conversation, I got elected dictator. Okay, welcome to the self-determination theory question and answer. I'm here with Donata. This is all great.
Okay.
Okay, so you're in Lithuania. You are working at a democratic school, and
Yes.
you're familiar with the terms autonomy, competence, relatedness. You try to do that, but there's want more. So so go ahead and what's kind of the pressing thing for you right now?
Like main things like deconstructing those three words. It's just
Mm.
three words, but they are big. So
Yeah, yeah.
like what's under like autonomy? How do we track that? How we monitor? How it's not
Mm.
just not to make it just sound nice and say like we try to do these things, but now we are figuring out like how to deconstruct those
Mm.
and
Mm.
what competences like qualities, attitudes we have to have there, and
Mm.
then to
Mm.
see how it all like lays out in our structures, in lessons, free time, everywhere.
Okay.
And I loved the thing you mentioned in, I don't know, some talks or like data thing, data business.
Right.
We have like in nowadays in education to be, and with SDT as well,
Mm.
to base like it's related to the progress, the inner, motivation. It affects a lot. Like,
Mm.
uh,
Mm. Okay.
not like, so yeah, mainly like some things we already do at school. So just
Mm.
to maybe just to think if we do it right and how to make it like not work, but to show even for ourselves, it's like connected
Mm.
and translated for the others and ourselves as well.
Right.
So
Right.
mainly that's the picture.
Right on. Right on. So so there are tools that I've put together that kind of can help you do some assessments, gather some data on need support in particular, or need
Oh,
satisfaction
great.
in particular. So on my website, I have there's a item called tools, and under tools you'll find what's called the climate tool. Now the thing is, one, it's in English. I don't know if there there are some translations of some of the instruments, but I don't know what they are. So that would be a challenge. And so, but that would be really cool to have you play with that and maybe do the translations if you need to.
Yeah.
But it's the idea behind the one I've created is it's something that you can just the idea is it will eventually be easy to just be able to do it on a somewhat regular basis, like a formative assessment. And then what I recommend is that if you really want to be serious about the data, then you get a more commercially available tool to do like annual or twice a year kind of assessments as well to sort of validate what you're working with on the other side. So, and I know there are tools that can do that. There's one called the Hope Survey. There's one called Youth Truth, which isn't specifically looking at these items, but you can then you know import the items into Youth Truth and then use that. Youth Truth is U.S. based. I don't know if it does international work, but it'd be worth
Yeah,
finding out.
yeah, I could check.
So there's that. Now as far as the terms, getting in deeply into them,
Yeah.
one of the things I can send you a PDF, but I've just put a thing I call the Attitude Guide to Education Hygiene. This is
Mm.
the proof copy that I have of the
Oh,
thing. So it's
okay.
available on Amazon. And I did make it available in European markets. I'm not sure exactly what countries it comes out of, but you should be able to find a version.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
But it actually goes into a lot of different kind of ways of covering those ideas. So, for instance, like this one is a whole page just on relatedness and how to support relatedness. So
Oh,
it's
great.
kind of the
Yeah,
do's and don'ts kind of thing. But this is the kind of thing where rather than just, giving you a definition, you can actually
yeah.
read about this. And this is all drawn from research papers that were done on it. So there's a page each on relatedness, all three needs, autonomy, competence, and relatedness.
Oh, great.
And
Yeah,
so that'll, and I think the other thing is that I think those ones are the ones that'll probably help you the most. But there is also, just for reference, there's a bunch of specific teacher behaviors that have been studied, and so I compiled
yeah,
those in here as well, separate paper. But going into the things that like there are things that teachers do that thwart autonomy. And so I have on the back cover of the book is actually a list of all the teacher behaviors that have been studied, and that it's kind of a checklist style. But you can see that like it's funny because this is for relatedness, and this
yeah.
one is apply fair punishments.
Hmm.
And then down here is provide rewards unfairly and provide punishments unfairly. So everyone gets that doing it unfair, like punishing someone unfairly, is going to be a thwart. But it's a mind bender for a lot of mainstream people. I don't know about you, but
Yeah,
punishing people even fairly has a negative effect on their well-being. Okay, so
yeah,
punishments, and is a bad idea. So
yeah. So that's very like because like in general, like in Lithuania, we are so starting in all of that. I would say,
hmm,
like even us, we are kind of not like revolutional, but alternative. This is a word that attached to us, like
yep,
definitely 10 years ago. It's 10 years already, but
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
even us, we are like exploring and working on it. But as we say, it's just the first generation of adults that's
mm,
trying to do something,
mm-hmm,
transforming
mm-hmm,
ourselves firstly. So
right,
we kind of sometimes feel like we lack some, even those like tick, things. Okay,
right, right,
something is working already, and not just taking like autonomy. So okay, do we cover that at our school so it doesn't work,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So yeah, of course
Yeah, it's
it's
a
a
big
lot of,
challenge,
yeah, yeah, it is
and and
actually it
and
is.
it's important that you have the attitude that we don't know or
Yeah,
we're not sure, because then you're realizing, oh, we need to seek out more support or more information or more, ways to engage with it and hone and verify, okay, are we doing the things that actually work? And then that also the idea of gathering the information is realizing that one of the most consistent findings in psychology is that we're not mind readers. All humans, no one is good at mind reading. Now, you get a little more accurate when you have a long-term relationship with somebody, but you're not, like more accurate means going from maybe 30% accurate to 50% accurate. Like the best people, the most accurate mind readers are 50-50. Like that's not very good.
Yeah.
That's not very reliable.
Yeah.
So it's important to realize that you're not a mind reader, and that you also have motivations to interpret things one way or another. Now, if you're an optimist, you're going to interpret it a little differently than if you generally have pessimism, but it's still, you're motivated to interpret things in one way or another, and so you're the way your brain is wired keeps you from becoming more than 50% accurate. And so it's important to have that, to have some way
Yeah.
to say, okay, how can I make sure that I'm not just deluding myself, as we all are all the time. It's just a matter of how, to what degree. And so you need these kinds of other information, other people, to help you figure out, am I getting this right? And importantly, the person you are trying to figure out, if you're trying to figure out if
Yeah.
their autonomy is being supported, ask them. Now, with kids, it's difficult to ask them directly, but
Yeah.
for instance, when you get the questions that are asked through the climate tool that I provide, I mean, even if you don't go to the degree of formally asking them and having a questionnaire and having them fill, check things or whatever, you can use them informally. You can say, look at the questions and kind of figure out, okay, this is kind of what they're asking, and ask a couple of different questions about it, and start to just assess it. Find ways to ask it, age appropriate ways. So if you're working with younger kids, you know,
Yeah.
a lot of the younger kids, you can be pretty clear that things are going pretty well. You can look at their behavior and say, okay, are they fitting in with things? Are they working with the things that are happening with the people around them? Because they're also trying to fit in. That's how we're wired, is
Yeah.
we try to get along with others. Even people who are neurodiverse want those things, even though they may have their wiring different, such that it makes it more difficult. But they still want those things. They still have, like, some people on the autism spectrum may seem like they just want to be left alone, but that's not true. They still have the need for relatedness. It's just a question of how you're
Yeah.
going to support them to get that need satisfied. And it may be different from other neurotypical people, but they still have the need, and they still have, you still need to support them to fulfill it. And the question is, okay, how are we going to do that? It may be that two or three people is more than they can handle, and they need more focused, like, okay, I need to relate to one person and someone who knows me.
Yeah.
That might be a legitimate need. Or it might be that they have other ways that they need to interact with people, you know, in order to get those needs met. But they do need the interaction on some level. And it's just a matter of sort of figuring out, okay, how do we do that? What does it look like for this person? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm just thinking, like, maybe in those tools you mentioned, I will definitely check them, but because one thing is what's for adults, like definitely about that delusion word you mentioned,
Right.
that yeah, that speaks to me a lot, because when you're not used to, you question a lot of things, and you get to routine sometimes and
Mm-hmm.
get off track, and so on. But
Mm-hmm.
like with
Mm-hmm.
children, yeah, I feel we have to be even more like careful, not imposing some things or just making fast, I don't know, not answers, but like somebody says I'm okay, so
Mm-hmm.
that's a fact. But
Mm-hmm.
do you have any, like, I understand you have to create it your way, like your own tools, but do you have like anything like to map like what's the main questions to be covered, like for relatedness,
Mm-hmm.
competence, and autonomy. I understand maybe
Mm-hmm.
that's too big, but how to structure even that in your head. Like we have some tools. I don't know, I could share like
Right.
what we
Right.
do at the moment, but
Mm-hmm.
like the theory maybe first. Yeah.
Right. Right. So in terms of just the needs more broadly, always put relatedness first
Okay.
because that's a kind of foundational in a sense that if you don't have your relatedness thing worked out, your attempts at doing other, like trying to support their autonomy,
Yeah.
might fall flat because they're not trusting you, they're not feeling related and belonging enough to have that work in the way that you thought it would. The other thing is that quite frankly, if you have a really strong relationship, if you have that trust, then some of the ways that democratic schools are structured to enable a lot of choice and things like that become less the opposite. The idea of being told what to do becomes less of a hindrance. In fact, there was a study done in Hong Kong that showed that kids who really had high levels of trust with their teacher or their mother would accept their decision on their behalf and feel as autonomy supported as if they'd made the decision themselves. So it is
Okay.
possible to, you know, be trusted enough to make decisions for someone else. But that's why relatedness is really important. Is if you're to that point of, and particularly, I mean, in you have some kind of conflict resolution process, those are where you're really building a lot of relationship. As conflict happens, and then are they being heard? Are they? It's the relatedness that they have to build on in order to get conflicts resolved and decisions made. So that for me means that
Yeah.
relatedness is the place, always the kind of place to start. Now, one of the things they also found is that the needs are interrelated. So if you start really building a relationship, you're probably also really building on the other needs as well.
Yeah.
Or if you were to take autonomy and build on that, you'd end up also building relatedness. So they go together. So that's that. So there's that. And then as far as kind of getting into nuances and things, I would suggest going in and looking at the items. So the tool that I have available isn't, like I said, it's not refined yet. Mainly, what you see is there's some ways to, like, if you use survey, like Google Docs or something, and create a survey. If you know how to do that, then you can just kind of plug them in. One of the things I built it for was, there's a tool called Plickers. So it enables a one person to just use a phone to create a survey. So that there's these cards that have the kind of like a QR code on them, and then the if you hold the card one way, it's one answer. If you hold it another, it's another one. Like, so it has an orientation
Yeah.
thing, and so you have four possible answers. So I actually created the tool around that because it's minimal technology and it can be used with kids if you have the cards. Or if you
Okay.
have kids who are old enough to use technology, you can just plug it into Google Forms, and create a survey that way.
Yeah.
But the idea was I wanted to make sure that technology wasn't a barrier necessarily. But but
Yeah.
but one of the things you'll find in there is an Excel spreadsheet that actually literally has all the items for, there's assessments for need satisfaction, but also need support. So someone's perception of like, the kids could be evaluating how well the adults around them are supporting them. So their perceptions of that, patterns of motivation and patterns of engagement. So all those things are in the big spreadsheet. The way I've done the tools is, so far I've only built out the piece for need satisfaction. But that's another thing, is that I don't expect people to just kind of run with the tool as it is. We can
Yeah.
work together and figure out how to, customize it or get it plugged in for whatever you need. Um,
Okay, so it feels like I have to go through all those tools and then have a session again. you know?
Probably, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because it's like really sounds what we need at the moment. Because I understand like there are a lot of ways like to try to do that, to
Hmm.
track those patterns, and it's not just one way. I get it, but you know, it's yeah, sometimes it just takes time to create something, you know, and
Exactly.
then you understand somebody already did it. So why,
Right, right.
waste your time?
Yeah,
So
and in
yeah,
this case, it's like you'd be helping develop the tool by using it. I've only had
yeah,
one school play with it so far, and they kind of did a little bit and then haven't done more. So that's it's an early stage for the tool, and so as people begin to use it, we'll figure out how to make it better, and once there's interest in it, we can start probably organizing
yeah.
more
So
formal
Don, is it
development process.
yeah, is it the climate tool or that you mentioned?
Yeah, it's called instant climate. So it's regarded the kind of way of talking about it is as a climate school climate tool, and it's at
Okay,
holisticequity.org. I don't know if I.
okay. Thank you so much. And yeah, we always like, I liked you mentioned like relatedness goes first because, you know, somehow this sounds for, I don't know, parents or not just parents, like, okay, so, but what about, you know, competences like
Right.
grammar and so on? So just checking like, you have to build some basic like competence or not, like how would you describe that, like to be autonomous, like
Mm-hmm.
not all maybe competences, it goes forever as we live, like, but according to academic things, what would be your thoughts on that?
So the important thing to know about all three needs, and
Yeah.
is that the satisfaction of them is a perception, not a circumstance. So it doesn't matter whether they objectively typical mainstream schools want to say, oh well, you need to be able to read this at this level, and so
Yeah.
that's not what this is about. This is about do you personally, like if you're the one being assessed, do you feel that you're
Yeah.
being effective at achieving your goals and your what you want? Are you effective in the environment as a perception? Because it doesn't matter, even an incompetent kid who can't read anything might feel that
Yeah.
getting through a picture book was what made them feel competent about that. It may be that they were struggling with something else, just trying to understand the story or whatever it is. So that's an important thing to remember, is that
Yeah.
this is a shift because it's all about their experience, not about how they are objectively in the world according to other people. It's their perception. And so
Mhm.
thinking about competence, like, you don't need competence in the sense of like you have to have some level of capability in the world, but you do have to perceive that what you're doing is meeting your goals and meeting your needs, and being the thing that you can build on. And so that's an important shift of mind, is to say,
Yeah.
particularly if you're talking about the grandparents or the parents or somebody coming in and saying,
Yeah.
what about, and they're usually thinking about the circumstance, the objective version of competence. They're not usually thinking about, well, is he feeling it? They're
Yeah.
not usually
Yeah.
thinking about that. So one way to begin to educate people on what matters, you say, well,
Mm.
I get it. He doesn't seem, sometimes kids will, be behind, which is a terrible way to think about it. But if they think he's behind in his skills, it's like, oh, okay, let's talk about what competence means in these two different ways of meaning it. Is one of the reasons that kids often get behind in regular school is because they're not providing support for the perception of competence. They're only trying to drive external competence. And so they're defeating their own purpose because they're getting ahead of the actual experience of the learner. So that's where your environment, you can say what we pay attention to first and foremost is where are they at? Where are these kids actually? Yes, they may not have all the skills that we want them to have yet, but our focus is on their experience to build as a learner, not as a reader or whatever skill you want to put into thing. Not as we're not building a mathematician, we're not building an author, we're not building, we're not trying to build them into our image of what would be economically productive. We're trying to build a
Yeah.
human being who wants to contribute to their community and their society through whatever skills and passions they figure out they have. And that's a different focus. So the way I talk about it in my books is about agency. Is the focus of what they need is the agency, the ability to act effectively, to represent and to act effectively with the not only their own personal ideals in mind, but what matters to their community. So both, and so that agency is what is the center of a democratic education in the way I talk about it, and
Yeah.
that's different from saying our whole job is to create economically productive, people, build human capital. That's not your job, but
Yeah.
that's what the mainstream is usually doing. And so you have to say, yes, we are alternative because what we take to be central is their ability and effectiveness as an actor, as an agent of their own, of what is good and true and beautiful,
Yeah.
instead of how can they plug into the economic machine and the political machine and the, like the machines of society. Like we're not creating that cog. We're creating somebody who can really be effective as a human being, and they can figure out what contributions can I make to this society, to my community, to my school, to my family. We want them to be thinking about, oh, okay, this matters to me. My community matters to me. My school, my family matters to me. What contribution can I make to it? And they have to discover those things. They have to figure those things out. And so that's the focus on agency, is like, oh, okay, if they constantly are discovering ways that they can be contributing and learn new skills in doing that, and all those skills come because the tools of our culture are really useful. So they will learn to read because reading is really useful. They'll learn
Yeah.
mathematics because it's really useful.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be as concerned about the broad skills because they'll get those, because they're useful tools in our culture. They would have to be. It's the suppression of their agency that actually prevents kids from learning in regular schools, because they're not focused on agency. They're trying to generate a reader, and they're trying to generate a mathematically skilled person, and that's misdirecting their energy. So does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Like that's the scariest part, maybe. And I feel like maybe the competence is the tricky part. That's where
Mm.
this theory is like blamed on like being a scary one, and like I don't know. Just checking on external competence, you meant about those readers, mathematicians, this part, right?
Yep.
When, yeah, so I feel this is like the main issue, like
Mm-hmm.
mixing everything up in a
Mm-hmm.
way. Because, yeah, when I mentioned, because we have those discussions at school, like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, if we don't give any like basics, you know, if we not deliver any like this external competence, so and we say be autonomous, are we
Mm-hmm.
right in that? Are we really like responsible, like adults leading through that journey? So there's a lot of like thinking on that we have,
Right.
like,
Right.
always.
And that's a fine line to thread, and that's why I had to write the manifesto to really talk about that.
Yeah.
And so the question becomes, the if you want to, if you need So let's pretend you want to get across a river and you need some way to do that. The the question is, like, what do you need to invest to make that happen? One way to do it is just get a boat and row across. Another way is to build a bridge. Okay?
Yeah.
If the goal is getting across the river, then there's different answers to that question, depending on what tools you have available, what opportunities you have available, what resources you have available. There's a whole bunch of things that are contingent on in order to achieve the goal. But the goal, and this is what I would say, the goal, the achievement of the goal is not dependent on the tools, resources, and opportunities you have. It's dependent on, do you have the agency to actually act on that with the resources you have? If you don't have the resources, you don't have a boat, and you don't have bridge building materials, there's nothing you can do. So if you have certain tools and not others, then being trained to use those other tools isn't helpful. You need to be able to use the tools you have available. So, but being an educated person means, what do I have available? How do I get my, when I decide something, is it the thing that, okay, I'm going to cross this river. Now, I have to assess before I can do anything, I have to say, what resources do I have available? What skills do I have to enable me to use those resources? The problem with mainstream schools is they say we only focus on these tools, and you're going to get them this way, and we're going to deliver them. Like, they completely ignore the fact that they need to be, before they ever learn to use a tool, they need to learn why a tool is valuable. And so that's why agency is the center of education, not any given knowledge, skill, or information that you might want to deliver to them. They need the skills to not only decide what I want to do, they have to decide how I'm going to do it, what are the tools I have available, what opportunities do I have available. Like, it's different to say, well, I can build a small little raft and I can get myself across and be done, and I can go on my way. But it's another thing to be able to say, no, wait, I have engineering skills and I have bridge building materials and I have, and I could actually build a bridge so that nobody, so that my neighbor and my family can also get across together. I can serve my community. I can provide value to my community by building a bridge instead of just selfishly, making my own little raft that only serves me. So agency is both the ability to act and the ability and the authorization to represent a collective in English. I know in other languages it doesn't have this dual meaning, but that's the thing the reason I really focus on agency, because in English, in my language, it has those two meanings. And so it's both the individual ability to act, but it's also the individual being authorized to represent something bigger, to be part of the collective, and to serve it. And so that's the thing that where, if you can paint that portrait of, like, okay, if I had an abundance, all the possible resources I can want, all the opportunities I wanted, and I went down to the river and I wanted to get across, then given all that I have, am I going to just get myself across, or am I going to build a bridge and do it in a way that serves other people to have an easier time to get across the bridge too? So that's where agency really matters, and it has both individual and collective implications. As to say, when we focus on agency as democratic schools, we're saying they need to be part of this community. We focus on how we work together. How do we make decisions, resolve conflicts, and things like that? Because we have to not only serve ourselves and learn the information, skills, knowledge that I need, but I need to do that in community. I need to do that as part of something bigger. And recognizing and saying, oh, how do I become part of this bigger thing? And the way you do that is you make your decisions together and you resolve your conflicts together. Those are the ways that you build the community. And then that community, when it's made up of all these agents who were simultaneously taking responsibility for themselves and their community, because they're so intimately involved in how it works and what the decisions that are made, then they become somebody who's wired, who's got long experience being a contributor to their community, because that's all they know, you know.
Yeah,
And that's not the way we think about education, is it?
yeah, thanks for that. It just somehow boosts the inspiration again about what we are doing, like on daily basis. Yeah, I was just thinking about still, like, I get that part, like being economic, like product, like cog. But is it like that component, like competence part? Do you think that's not like the evil part, but that's the main issue about putting, the timeline, the age groups, the I don't know, some external competence, all these things you feel there when we lose each other, and all the education part, because like nobody says like autonomy is like bad,
Right,
or
right,
relatedness is bad, like
exactly.
but yeah, for me somehow this competence part, or we when we talk, like I don't know, with state schools, or parents, they agree like on soft competences, like
Mm.
no worries about that. But when it comes to that
So
safe, part, I want to be safe, that a kid is going through a pre-planned journey, and
right, right,
but being autonomous somehow, and
right,
you
right,
know
right. So I
yes.
think so I've actually written about this, I think in both books, is that there's at least three different kind of ways that I think people mainly talk about education and schooling. And the mainstream one is focused to be generous and say, okay, they must have had something real in mind when they generated this system. They must have been doing so. So I take the idea that we should interpret their intentions as good. So when I look at the mainstream system, what I see is what they were most wanted to accomplish is objective competence. And so that makes sense of that system to me. So, oh, okay, that's why you have degrees and you have grades and you have a bunch of things. And then you can look at the history to say, oh, okay, they kind of divided kids into ages mainly because that was convenient. And given that their focus was on competence, it seems sensible to sort of say, okay, well, if we just gradually build up all these competences, then it makes sense. And usually the main one that is taken as the prototype is mathematics, because they mathematics seems to logically be built one thing on top of
Yeah,
another.
yeah,
Now,
that's the argument.
it's only partly true, but there is definitely some contingent. You have to have something. You have to have arithmetic before you can do certain types of. You have to have basic arithmetic operations in order to do algebra and things like that. So to some degree, it's true, but it's not as strictly built up in the way, like the way the human mind works. Is that's not the only way to build out those
Yeah,
skills, but taking that perspective as doing something good, then okay, yes, there we're doing that. Now the history of schooling added a whole bunch of layers of stuff that's, when you look at it from a better perspective of agency as the center, you realize, oh, okay, it's a historical accident that they did it that way and not some other way, because there are other perfectly legitimate ways to accomplish the same task. So you can say, okay,
yeah,
there were some mistakes were made, and we can move on from that. Now, the challenge that they have in the mainstream is how to move on from those mistakes, and that's a different conversation. But but that's something I hope to help them with. But in your case, it's sort of like understanding the mainstream system is one, understand they did want something good. Now, they took the external version of competence as the only relevant factor. It's like, well, it turns out the internal perception of competence is actually how humans meet a fundamental psychological need. That's how they have well-being in the world. And so they are related because
Yeah.
as you perceive the competence, that generates the motivation to keep trying. You look at little kids who just do, like give them art materials and they'll just draw, and it doesn't matter to them that they don't draw realistically.
Yeah.
They just do it, and then if you give them feedback in the right way, then they will get better at that drawing, and it can become more realistic if that's something they end up valuing, which eventually they may. And that's usually what stops many adults is they never develop the skill to have the feedback to be able to say, okay, now I can just build skill and have the motivation be there. Because the way that schools, mainstream schools, tend to operate is they sort of say, okay, are you competent or not? Let's move on. Are you competent or not? Let's move on. And
Yeah.
and so the kids who answered not, or who for whom not was the correct answer, the class moves on, and then they get stuck, and then they develop a sense of themselves as, oh, I'm not good at that. Well, of course, you're not good at, there's an infinite number of things that you are not good at. That doesn't matter. The question is this something you value, and can you get better at it? That's not how our education's set up. So that's one of the ways that people think about education. That's, to take it as a good, noble enterprise. Yes, people need to become objectively good at stuff in order to have the technologies that we're using right now. Like a lot of generations of competent people to get to where we can have this conversation across continents. I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay. But in order to do it well, and to do it where it's not actually costing that person their mental health and other issues, you need to do it where their motivation matters too. And so you need to take it both into account. Another way that people think about education is in terms of, if you think about a lot of social justice, there's people who are, call it woke, but the people who are really thinking about, wait a minute, there's ways that we need to be relating to each other, and then what they're really noticing underneath that is that, to take the typical U.S. example, my white teacher has a savior complex and wants to save me from myself and from my identity, and that my identity doesn't matter to that white teacher because I'm black or Latino or trans or whatever it is. My white, straight, all the opposites on a teacher, is what they're focused on is that relationship. They're saying teacher has a noble goal, like we're going to interpret it as noble, but they're doing things that get interfere with the relationship between them and that child, because if they don't recognize how their identities and assumptions and cultural baggage cause them to behave in a way that alienates this child,
Yeah.
that child is at a disadvantage and cannot learn as well as they otherwise could. So in my way of thinking, the kind of social justice lens is focused ultimately on relatedness. It's saying, teachers, you have to be culturally responsive. You have to be take them from where they're at. You have to take their identities seriously, no matter what those identities are. And even if you don't like them, you're a professional, and professionalism means, in our schools, and in schools that are run well, it means like, yeah, you may not have chosen those students, but if you didn't choose those students, you still have to educate them, and educate them means you take their identity seriously. That's your professional responsibility, even if personally you don't like it. So one system is focused on competence, objective competence. Unfortunately, it should be, and then you have the relatedness. Now, what I consider the democratic school and the self-directed education and Montessori's and a lot of other things, they're focused on the autonomy. Say, okay, autonomy's thing. And in the absence of precise scientific definition of this, they basically said, oh, well, I know that I don't like being told what to do, so let's not tell kids what to do. And then they generated a whole bunch of ways to do school that way. and it looks like democracy, and it looks like making decisions together. But more importantly, it also looks like resolving the conflicts that arise from making decisions autonomously and in community at the same time. So to me, the core of what I would consider agentic schooling is making decisions and resolving conflicts. Because all those systems, no matter when you do school, I mean, and this could be any organization, it doesn't matter if you call it school or not, but if you're taking care of other people's kids, you have to figure out who makes the decisions and how do we resolve the conflicts that arise from those decisions that were made. Democratic schools are at the most extreme and say, we're going to try and make as few decisions as possible. We're going to make absolutely, we're not going to decide on your academics. We're not going to decide on your daily activities. We're not going to decide those things for you. But we exist as a community. And so, because you're in our community, you're going to make decisions. And some of those decisions are going to generate conflicts with other people. Because those conflicts were generated, we now have to deal with that stuff because I think the reason most schools that were democratic or self-directed in their inception, most of them fail because they don't work out a sustainable, realistic, humanly possible way to resolve all those conflicts. And the reason the mainstream is in trouble is because they're not resolving conflicts that were generated by decisions made generations ago. Why do we have them, all the kids in the same age in the same classroom? Those were decisions made ages ago. They make no sense from a child development standpoint, from a relationship standpoint. Starting a new relationship every year is stupid. It doesn't make any sense. If you want kids to learn consistently and build skills, and then you maintain a relationship with those people that you are in community with. So that's where interpreting those ways of thinking about schooling, when from my perspective through self-determination theory, I realized, oh, okay, one, we can refine what we mean by an educated person to come down to agency as the central thing, not the knowledge, skills, or information, not the tools of the culture you will use, but the agency itself. And when you organize as a school, you have to focus on two things more than anything else, and that is who makes decisions and how do you resolve the conflicts that arise from people's decisions. And the advantage you have as a new school that's only 10 years old instead of being hundreds of years old is you can change those decisions. You don't have this long, deep history that makes it difficult to say, oh, well, that was a mistake, let's move on. You can do that easier because you're a smaller community probably. How many students are in your school?
70.
Oh, that's a good size. Still small by most standards, but that's a good size. It's a good solid, group of people who can, do stuff.
Yeah.
So you're in an advantage because you're in a small organization and you don't have a deep history, and so making changes is going to be easier for you than somebody who has hundreds of years. Like I was just reading about a school in England that's was established in the 1500s, and it's like, okay, you're probably not going to make huge fast changes to that because they literally and think about something like Summerhill in England that's a little over 100 even. It's like when the government tried to shut them down, their alumni mobilized to protect the school.
Yeah.
So when you have generations of alumni also paying attention to what you're doing, that creates a resistance to change. Now you don't have that. You have 10 years, so you might have a few people. You've sent a few on, but they're probably not intimately involved, and they're probably not going to resist change the way that the alumni of a more established school would. Plus, they probably don't have that much power over your organization. A lot of times when schools get older, they, will have the alumni board, or they'll have an organized effort to keep people connected to the school. So when you take those, because what I did was I said, okay, I see these three different views, and they're each match well to a primary human need that needs to be part of the conversation. And so all those are valid ways of approaching the idea of school, as long as you take a need as the basis for the organization. But then you need to say, okay, but is it okay to pursue objective competence and sacrifice autonomy? And I say no. And that's where my criticism of mainstream is. You're pursuing objective competence, so first of all, recognize it's the perception, not the circumstance, that is educative. So they need a little shift in perspective there. But then, no matter what kind of competence you pursue, it's not okay to thwart another need in order to get it.
Yeah.
So that's really crucial. Is like, it is not okay to pursue relatedness at the expense of autonomy. Like we're going to be, and this is where I think, like when people talk about cults and the organizations that are really unhealthy, is oftentimes what they're doing is trying to pit relatedness against autonomy. That's an abusive relationship tactic. They say, well, I love you, but you have to do what I say. And it's like, you're confused about something there.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
not how it works. And so that's another way to look at it, is to say, you know, there are very strong school cultures, but if they're pitting your relationship with that school against the autonomy to act and do the things that you need to do to meet your needs, then that's a problem. That becomes a toxic relationship. And so that's where I think that we can, what you're doing is something that you're a little fresher. When you've taken a certain stance, and that is, we're going to value autonomy, which I think is it's a valid way to approach it. But then you have to say, how much relatedness do we need to build in order to become more truly agentic, truly autonomous, in the sense of autonomous within a community? Because those things are both true. Autonomy is not this, not opposed to being acting. Like, some people think that autonomy means being independent, and that's not true. In fact, autonomy is only yeah, autonomy is only really supported when you're in relation with others, such that they value that autonomy. Another one is structure, as people assume that. And in fact, in the democratic school community, people will talk about, oh, we don't provide structure, and that's not true.
Yeah.
Structure is what enables people to be autonomous. An unstructured person is dead. That's the only kind of unstructured that matters. There's always structure in human relationships. And so the question is not whether the structure is there or not, because structure is inherent to being human. The question is, what kind of structure are you talking about? What kind of structure are you building and reinforcing and utilizing? And if it's a structure that is only implicit, in other words, you don't make it clear and evident to everyone what the structure is, then you're inviting those kinds of playing relatedness against autonomy and things like that. You're inviting the toxicity. And this is what I think a strength of the democratic schools is, that they usually, not always, but usually, are really upfront, clear, and communicate their structures. They say, here's how we make decisions. Here's how we resolve conflicts. And they use tools that can be identified, and there's communities of support for the use of those tools in that community. So that's what I think is really strong. Even though they may say unstructured, they're not being clear about what structure means. And their real question is, they're providing a certain kind of structure. They're providing more social structure than academic structure, and I think that's a valid choice. And then they're clear. I think the best ones are clear about the structure that they're providing. They're saying, this is how we do this. This is how we make decisions. This is how we resolve conflicts. And then that's how you proceed. So
I just to, if I made the right notes, because it feels so good, when you in a way structure this, because it's like the sense like you are doing something you cannot explain, and how it somehow makes not just sense. That's not the right word, but somehow now I get it what we do, because when we try to explain it, sometimes it just feels everybody does that because it's general words.
Right, right.
And everybody agrees with like, yeah, competent and autonomous and related. And you're
Hmm.
like,
Hmm.
okay, what do we do now?
Right, right,
Like,
right.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
autonomy like needs structure and being in relationship. Oh, I missed that first part.
Yes, all the needs require structure in order to be fulfilled. The
Hmm.
question is not structure or not structure. Structure is crucial,
Hmm.
but the question is what kind of structure?
Yeah.
Are you being deliberate and upfront, expressing it clearly and saying this is how we structure it and not this other way? Or are you simply winging it? And then that's why I think a lot of people in the democratic school environment as staff or parents and things like that tend to get lost is because they don't realize that they are structuring an environment. Their job is the structure of the environment. They just don't realize what they need to be doing to maintain that structure. And so they don't see themselves as doing anything. So you'll get book titles like Making Out Up As You Go Along, Chris Mercogliano's book, which is an entertaining book. It's really good. But actually, they're not making up as they go along in some in important ways. Because what I think democratic schools do well is, like I said, and I'll say it again, decide
Yeah.
together, make decisions, and then
Yeah.
resolve the conflicts that result. And that's
Conflicts.
what a good school does. Is
Hmm.
they're clear about those two things. Now it's not every school because I think it might be the Macomber Senator or one of the there's a school that or maybe it's Xena. Anyway, there's a school east of me in the United States that I met some people from it, and they broke off from another school and said, we're going to do things a little differently, and they decided to not have any of the formalities around conflict resolution that the other school had. And so, and they've been going for, I think over a decade, whichever one I'm thinking of. And so they do fine not having a formal structure. Now, the person I've talked to, the more than one person I've talked to, they do the conflict resolution stuff, and they, as a staff, if I understood it correctly, do talk about how they resolve conflicts,
Yeah.
but they don't have a explicit formal structure that they follow to do it. So it's not that they don't have a process; they do, and it's
Yeah.
not that they don't make it up as they go along, but they do allow the people to resolve things
Hmm.
without having to write things down, without developing a whole record, without having a whole committee. They just do things in a certain way. It's structured differently, but it's structured more implicitly at the level of day-to-day interaction. And but I also believe, if I understood the conversation correctly, that that is a constant conversation that they're
Hmm.
having, is that they're valuing the relationships with everybody and they want to make sure that conflicts are being handled and resolved as needed, but they just don't do it in an externally, objectively uh, structured way. They're not using some tool
Hmm.
and having a number of steps and go. They're just saying, okay, we really have to be able to do this. And I think that they're successful at that because the beginning of the school was based on a bunch of people coming from another environment where there was a formal structure, and so they built skills into their community when they started. They had a skill set that was strong, and so they were able to utilize that strength, and it seems like, because they've survived for years and years, is that that was part of the culture that they created amongst their staff in particular, and that they cultivate in their students, is we're going to be able to really strongly deal with conflict. And so it's really interesting that way.
Yeah. So many things just to
Yeah.
reflect on. I will have to sit for a night now. But
Yeah, yeah.
what one more thing I just noted for myself. I totally agree. Like making decisions and resolving conflicts is like about democratic schools. But you mentioned like not most, but some democratic schools feel like not sustainable on that. Could you a
Right.
bit
So
explore?
um,
Yeah.
democratic schools. In fact, I have Carl Geller's History of Democratic Schools right in front of me. I've been meaning to give him
Oh.
feedback about it. And so there's been, I think most people identify basically a couple of waves, previous waves of, increase, like 20s, 30s, somewhere around there. There was a big boom,
Yeah.
and then it kind of died back for a while. And then the 60s and 70s, there was another big boom. And I think since the 80s, we're going through a third wave of democratic schools. But the reason that schools in the first two booms mostly died off is because I think they weren't clear on the necessity of structure.
Mm.
Specifically, I mean, it seems to be obvious that in the 60s, they were specifically saying, we provide unstructured environments, we react against structure, et cetera. So they actually literally had in their talk, in their rhetoric, they had this belief that structure was bad. And so to me, that's an
Mm.
obvious sign of why they failed. And the ones that succeeded, in spite of that rhetoric, because some of them still used it for many decades, the reason they succeeded in spite of that rhetoric was because they found some structure that worked for them nonetheless. So, for instance, Sudbury Valley School started in
Yeah.
1968, and they Daniel Greenberg has written a lot about, I don't know if he used the term unstructured specifically. I'm sure he did in the past, even if he didn't. He's passed on now, but he has, used that same style of rhetoric. But it's founded on the New England Town Meeting. That's a structure. They found a structure
Yeah.
that worked. And the interesting thing about that was their structure incorporated both making decisions and resolving them, in using a very kind of formalistic system to do that. And so they happened upon a structure that worked out both ways. And so wonderful, they succeeded. Summerhill, they I don't know that they if it has the same historical roots, but they found a structure that worked, and they've been using it for over 100 years now. So I think that, and when I went to um, Kathmandu, we learned about the democratic school there. I've been around, to
Yeah.
learned about democratic schools all over the world, and I think that what happens to the ones that succeed over a long term, not just for a few years, but over a decade, is that they're finding some culturally relevant way to make decisions and resolve conflicts. And so it did. In fact, I think that the schools that try to adopt the Sudbury model, I've been to at least one conference. Well, and I've been to a number of Democratic conferences where the conversation becomes how they're deviating from the model. And one, it's not
Mm.
really a formal model, and like they don't care. But I think that the reason that these schools evolve away from that is because it's a culturally specific model. It's one that matters and works in a certain cultural context. And if you don't have that context, you need to evolve away from it. It's fine to start there, but then you need to figure out what works for who you are. And I think another thing I was observing at this conference that was organized for Sudbury type schools
Mm.
was that so many of them were talking about how they're, deviating from the model. But I think that what they're doing is, some of them are older schools where, like, they've developed those skill sets and they don't need to rely on that specific structure to do the things they need to do. And so they can start to flex on the structure, or make it more implicit and less explicit. But I think that the crucial thing is that they're in the conversation and saying what works for us, who we are,
Mm.
and then figuring out, okay, what do we need to do to make this different, to make it work for us. And for some people, that seems to be less formality around conflict resolution, or maybe a looser process, even if it does have some formality. And then in decision making, it's like, well, sometimes that majority rules isn't always the best way to make a particular decision. So they start to say, okay, well, we're going to do consensus for some decisions, or we're going to use a sociocracy process, which shifts the responsibilities a little bit. So they start to say what's working for us, and I, as far as I know, Sudbury isn't attached to their model as anything anybody else should do. They are attached to their model for them because that's what works for them, and so that's I think that's a perfectly valid way to approach it.
Yeah. Just thinking like, yeah, it's quite a journey, even
Yeah.
to, I don't know, discover this, like, yeah, I believe kids need that, but
Mm-hmm.
as for
Mm-hmm.
an adult, like, um, any like suggestions what to do, like when you have to deliver, not, learning, of course, like together, like,
Right.
that's a
So
bit,
give me
yeah.
a little bit of a sense of what, like one of the challenges, or more specifics about a challenge that you're facing with your adults.
Um, Actually, it's not like, like challenges, but like I feel like we have those discussions and we recognize it's like from our
Mm.
past because we were like in a state school. We are products
Mm.
of the state school. So some things just, some fears, some, beliefs or just, things just pop up when
Mm-hmm.
situations are hard. And so, of course, that external competence thing
Right. Right.
really do, yeah, is it not too free, are we responsible,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and of course like parents adds up, like
Right. Right.
when there are some situations, then we're like, oh my god, really, like how do,
Right.
it's not like that bad, but sometimes we doubt ourselves, of
Right.
course it's like normal.
Mm-hmm.
But we understand we are not there ourselves, like we
Right.
are transforming and we are, yeah, of course trying our best.
Right.
But any
Right.
like suggestions how to, because for us it's the same, like needs, psychological needs,
Exactly.
like agency. So one thing like for our school, and we are trying to look of like how to build the competence, how to to talk about reply, but like in general I think like for the state system, maybe I'm going too far now,
Mm.
from our school to the system, but it's like two things, like not firstly about the, I don't know what should be first, but adults are the ones who create the space
Mm-hmm.
for okay, so that's my thoughts.
So what were those two things? Like go ahead and you said like.
External competence, like what
Mm-hmm.
pops about like when we think like, oh, so shouldn't we like do basis, like academic
Right.
basis, and then talk about autonomy, or
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, like about conflict resolution or even decision making. We are
Mm-hmm.
adults, we know what's safe, so where's
Right.
those boundaries, and it's so easy to slip to that authority we as adults have. It's just authority in
Mm-hmm.
anyways,
Mm-hmm.
because we are bigger, like older and so on. So you have to be so sensitive about these things yourself and
Yeah. Yeah.
resourceful, and so
Yeah. And that's the question is when you're dealing with the adults, you have so this is why did you come to that story, the session where I told the story about how schools came to be? And
yeah, yeah, yeah,
okay,
yeah.
so you remember in that story, what I was talking about is that there's a cultural infection that we have,
Yeah.
and that's what you're up against. Is there's a cultural infection that says I, by right of my adultness or my whiteness or my maleness or my ability or my sexuality or whatever it is, for some reason, I believe I have the right and obligation. I'm committed to making decisions on your behalf, whoever you are. You might be a child, you might be a woman, you might be, of color, you might be whatever it is. I feel like because of this, what I call breaker culture infection,
Yeah.
I feel like I have the right to make a decision for you on your behalf. I know what's good for you. Okay. But that's a cultural infection. That's not how human beings inherently healthful when they're healthy are, because a healthy human, by definition, has to deal with those three needs. and support those needs in other people. That's what we know causes well-being in humans. To thwart those needs, specifically the autonomy need, if I decide I get to make the decision for you without your input, yeah, that's actually undermining their humanity by definition. Okay? So that's what you're describing is the cultural infection. Because human beings have the need for autonomy, and to the degree they recognize the need for autonomy in others, then that cannot be making decisions for others is not a healthy way to be. Now, let's be clear though, children are a hard case because when they are infants, they literally are helpless. And we do have to make decisions for them.
Yeah.
Okay? But the challenge is, how do we stop infantilizing them when they're no longer infants? That's the challenge. That's the thing you're facing is wait a minute. And this is a way to approach it is say, okay, I get it. You have an opinion. You, as an experienced adult with many decades of experience, you have an opinion about what's safe and what isn't. Great. That's okay. It's okay to have an opinion. However, the question is, do you have the kind of relationship with this child such that you can tell them what to do without thwarting their autonomy? And then the other piece is, even if you have that relationship, is making the decision for them what they really need in their development of skills and judgment and agency over their own, making their own decisions. Like, they need to be able to say, is that safe for me or is that too dangerous? Now it's legitimate to say, hold on a moment before some dangerous thing happens.
Yeah.
Say, hold on a moment. And I've done this. I've worked in, both volunteered and worked in a democratic school, and did my own. I homeschooled other people's kids for about 5 years, and so I have literally said, hold on a minute. I think I'm really concerned about you're climbing this tree or you're jumping off of that branch or whatever it is. Now, and literally when I was homeschooling other people's kids, I had a contract that said I'm responsible for safety. And that's a legal responsibility that I have, independent. Even if I wanted to give it away, I can't. I'm legally responsible. I'm obligated to be responsible for safety. So the way, though, that I am express that responsibility is I say, hold on a moment. Or if I really think something's happening that is dangerous, I may take command of the situation and say, no, we are doing this. Yeah. But another thing in my contract was they get to come back at me if I make a poor decision. They get to question my decisions when I do that. And I had to actually eventually put that in the contract and say, if you think I made a mistake, tell me, because I need that feedback. I can't tell. I'm not automatically going to question my own judgment. I need somebody else to judgment, and if they feel like it was different. So that's the thing, is, are you supporting their autonomy when you make that decision for them, based on your opinion about what the situation is? If they're truly caring and concerned about children's development, then they should be able to, think, like, question themselves and say, oh, maybe I shouldn't have made that decision. Now, some of them are going to be good decisions and some of them are not. And sometimes you'll make bad decisions you won't ever know that was a bad decision, because the kid's not going to say, you did you made a mistake there. So the attitude to take is to be healthily concerned about the decisions you might make on behalf of another person, particularly around the children. It's is this the decision I need to make for them, or is this a decision they should learn how to make? Is this the moment when they should learn how to make that decision? And what I tend to do is I believe I should default to, this is a decision you should make for yourself because you're about to make the decision. There are exceptions to that. As I said, I am concerned about safety, and that's my legal responsibility. But If it's a decision of what should we do today, that was the point of my homeschooling of those kids. Yes, let's make those decisions together. I'm going to let you
Mm.
make a bunch of decisions, and we may vote on them, and we may, have ways to make decisions. Actually, it was a consensus-run small group. We occasionally, by consensus, decided that a majority vote for certain decisions was going to be the way we would do things, and I did. I actually got appointed dictator for a day. That was interesting. I was
Yeah,
voted. I was
it's
by
tend to us.
consensus made dictator for a day. Which means I consented to it. But it was a situation in which there was one child who was very challenging, and he was behaving in ways I was like, hey, you know what? Or he was interacting with others. It wasn't just him. It was interacting with some other. There was, I think, 3 or 4 boys on a bus, and we were like having a challenging time. And I was concerned that we might get kicked off this bus because they were being so you
Yeah.
know loud and stuff. And so the way I said it, what I said was, if this was a regular school, this is how what I would do. And they said, okay, let's do that. And I was like, what? And then they essentially, through a conversation, I got elected dictator. I managed them for the rest of the day as I worked in regular mainstream type of situations, not in schools specifically, but in like an after school program and at camps and stuff like that. So I knew how to take control of a group of kids and manage their behavior. And so I did that. Now, I never got elected dictator again. And I think that's an important point too,
Yeah.
is that they, through that process, through that conversation, and then my subsequently acting on their desire, they realized that they didn't really want like okay, we'll try that out. And they're like, oh, okay. Then that was fun for the day. And then they never wanted it again. And I think that's an important thing to realize.
Yeah, surely. And I think like this, like honest concern should be like about, I don't know, decisions we make for kids, especially.
Right.
It should be like the main subject for like teacher meetings, like in any school. Yeah,
Right.
like we.
Right.
I feel like a reflection and just being open about things you do is so lacking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
No time for that. No time because so many important things to do. So yeah.
Right, and that's where the thinking about the crux of education, of educating a person, being agency, really shifts the paradigm, and I mean that literally in a accurate sense. Because instead of being concerned about the content and the knowledge and the skills, you say, "Oh, what decisions are we making? What conflicts are we resolving?" Those become the focus. Those become the highest priority. Is like, oh, wait, what decisions have I been making on their behalf? Should I be letting go of that? Should I be doing something different? That should be the highest priority. And then after you've sort of gotten a handle on that, then you start to say, oh, well, I'm concerned that they're not building this kind of skill or they're not getting that kind of information. And that's also legitimate, but it's less important. If you are truly educating them. And an educated person is someone who perceives accurately, thinks clearly, acts effectively on self-selected goals and aspirations that are appropriate to their situation. Okay? So that appropriate to the situation, that's where the real crux is in terms of educating another person. As someone concerned with a child's education, how do they understand the situation they're in? Do they have an accurate understanding? Do they understand what the opportunities are, what the resources are, what the limitations are? Okay. Children, by definition, do not understand the situations that they are in because they don't have enough experience. They haven't built
Yeah.
the neural architecture to be able to take in more and more of their situation. This is what development is their maps of what it means to be a human being have to expand to include not just themselves and their immediate what's in front of them literally. They have to be able to encompass, oh, here's what the future where the future lies, here's where the past was, here's the situation in which I am embedded right now. That's what it means to be an educated, truly educated person, is someone who really understands their situation. And so how do we help kids understand more and more about the situation they are in? And they have to expand their circles of awareness of like, oh, there's an environment out there, and so if I dump the motor oil in the gutter because I'm done with it, that's a bad thing. They have to think about those things. But so do adults. Adults are in the same problem. And so that's the reason you can never stop learning, is because you never understand your situation completely. That's that's a fantasy that you'd ever understand your situation completely, because it changes all the time, and there's all these levels to it and all that. So that's the crux of being an educated, of what educators should be focused on. As an educator, if I want them to do better as a human being, the main thing to focus on is the situation. How do they understand their situation? When they make decisions about how to behave in their situation, did they do a good job? Because that's what they're, did they think clearly? Did they perceive accurately? Well, we know from psychology that actually most people don't perceive accurately very much. There's some things they get pretty well. We're pretty good at the physical stuff, but in terms of understanding other people's emotions, other people's states of mind, that's really tricky, and we're really bad at it. So it's a really interesting situation. So that's where, as educators, if you take the agentic schools perspective, then you say, oh, okay, one, our main job is, we as a community together, the main things we have to do first and foremost is make decisions and resolve the conflicts that result from those decisions. And that means, you're making decisions individually and collectively. So it all fits together. But decisions resolve conflicts. But me as an educator, I have a further responsibility. My responsibility is helping people understand their situation, which also means you have to understand your situation better and better. You have to get better at understanding what your situation is. And so, are you in a situation like in Lithuania, does the state take an interest in what your school does? Do they require a curriculum or anything?
Yeah, they do, but we just choose our ways to apply it.
Right. So that's the thing. You have to understand, like, uh, uh, a school situated similarly in the United States doesn't have to. The no government in the United States is allowed to dictate the curriculum of a school, and that's a unique historical accident, and it's actually pretty cool. It's what allowed a lot of schools to exist. But because of that, our situation as Americans is very different from your situation in Lithuania. And there are places, there are countries where, like Nepal, that the state does take responsibility for ensuring that there is a uniform curriculum in every school, no matter who runs it or how it's funded or managed. So the democratic school in Kathmandu has to do certain things that is different from what an American school, even what a Lithuanian school, is going to be able to do. So they have to do certain things, but that's just, they have to understand the situation. And that doesn't change whether they're an agentic school or a democratic school, or to me, that's why I use the term agency. It's like you can have any structure. Like I'm agnostic as to the structure of a school. I don't care, because the humans are there. No matter what you do, there's humans, and they all have those needs. That's what the science has found. And so there's a way to do that structure thing that is more need supportive or less need supportive. And the question is, are you doing it in the need supportive way? Even if you have to require stuff because the state requires it of you, one of the ways you can handle that is say, yeah, look at that. I'm required to do something. How are we going? And you can recruit them to help you with that, and then help them express their autonomy and maybe even their frustration at having to kowtow to some government requirement. Like, hey, yeah, that's frustrating for me too. But we have to do it. Now what? So that to me is a really important aspect of my perspective, is I'm structure agnostic. I don't care about the structure, but whatever structure you have has to be implemented in a way that supports needs, because the humans are there either way.
Yeah,
So
that
that's
makes
the
sense.
that's the crux for me. When I'm dealing with schools, is like, okay, you have a structure that you've either chosen or is imposed, and then you get to make choices about how you're going to implement that structure. And sometimes you might have to hide some of the ways you're going to do that. There, I was hearing about schools in Germany where the German, and I think it varies by state, but some of the German states, have more requirements, and so they'll put on the dog and pony show and say, when the inspector comes, and they, hey, look, that I'm in charge, I'm the adult, look, me, I'm telling them what to do, and they're obeying me, and this is great. And then when the inspector goes away, then like, okay, kids, show's off, make your own choices. And so, that's just the nature of the human society we have now. We have these breaker cultural infections. And one of the ways that shows up is that some governments have imposed requirements on all schools, or imposed requirements on some schools and not other schools, or whatever. And so, okay, we can still fight the infection and say, okay, but they're all humans here and they have the needs, and we're going to do whatever structure we're required to do, or whatever structure we've chosen to do. We're going to do it in a need supportive way instead of a need thwarting way.
Okay, maybe just for the end,
Yeah,
I took some of your time, Don.
that's okay.
Sorry,
That's what this is about.
but it was really useful. Like SDT, like theory, it's quite
Mhm.
new. So, like, if you
In what
shortly could
sense?
describe, like, it's not like 100 of years, and
Yeah, it's only 50,
now,
40 or 50 years old.
yeah, yeah. So it's, I would say, like, kind of new thing,
Kind of new, yeah.
and education just discovered it. So it's like
Yeah, that's true.
something, yeah, yeah. And I don't know what's the situation like now. Maybe it's just the education, as I'm from there, on the wave, like, oh, SDT answers, there's an answer for everything. But how do you see the situation? Politicians, or I don't know, human rights organizations, do they take it, or it's still like,
So self-determination theory is interesting in the education world.
mm,
So, I mean, there's some interesting things about the way it is in the world of psychology too, because it's not. So, I think, and this is personal opinion, I think that SDT in psychology should be considered the evolutionary theory, as evolutionary theory is to biology.
mm, okay,
It's that powerful, mainly because it has identified some causal sources of mental well-being. Like, that's what psychology is all about, right? So even in psychology, it doesn't get, I think, the status and recognition that it deserves.
mm,
But now, when you then think about the adjacent field of education, one of the interesting things, there was a paper recently that came out within the last couple of years that looked at the top 12 education psychology journals in the world, and looked at what are the most cited authors and what are the most cited papers in that literature. And self-determination theory is overrepresented in those top tiers. There's the founders are, I think, in the top three, as far as, or top four.
mm,
One of the founders. So, and then there's a bunch of other researchers that are in those top areas, and then the top papers. Like, I think, anyway, it's a very well represented in education psychology, and yet it is not understood in education circles
mm,
generally. The Maslow's hierarchy is generally regarded more favorably than SDT, even though it's wrong. It is a very
mm,
poor model that should be replaced by self-determination theory. I have a whole piece on my website about that. So SDT is not getting the respect that it deserves in education as well. And that's why I wrote my book, Educating to Schools Manifesto, is to say we need to really be, to get clear about how the SDT model informs the educative process. And so that's why the manifesto is particularly important, because it's saying, that's where I really boldly claim Like my prior book won awards and was really, Schooling for Holistic Equity was, laid the foundation for the manifesto. But the manifesto was when I said, oh, wait a minute, we can really actually claim you need the SDT to lay the foundations. This is where one of the things that I in it is this back to basics 2.0. So when you talk about the idea of basics being important, is that's a legitimate point of view, but you need to understand what's truly basic to learning before you're talking about what's basic tools in our society. So basics in 2.0, that's what it is about. You have to nurture the children and the teachers. Where by nurture I mean providing for their psychological needs. So if you're not doing that, you're handicapping yourself. So understanding that there's, and then this is not about the educative process itself. It is about the conditions under which the educative process occurs. So this falls under, in the American system, legal system, we have this principle called in loco parentis. And that's a Latin phrase that make it in the place of the parent. So educators or anyone who takes responsibility for somebody else's children takes on this idea that they have a parental type of responsibility for the well-being of that child. So the reason that you can hold people accountable for child abuse or neglect or kids getting injured when it was neglect of the person in charge is because of this legal principle. And so what I'm arguing is, I don't care what your educative process is, but if you have responsibility for a child that is not your own, if you're not the parent, then you have to be concerned for their well-being in a clear, distinct way that includes their psychological needs.
Yeah.
And so taking responsibility for children and then telling them what to do without respect for their need for autonomy is a problem. And it's not a problem of education. It's a problem of basic respect for that human being and the fact that they're a child. It is the parent's responsibility to provide for the well-being of their children, and that specific responsibility transfers to anyone you give your child to. And so I, taking responsibility for any child, have to take those into account as it's not only a legal responsibility, but a moral responsibility. Like, yes, you have to care for them and take care of their well-being and nurture them in that basic way. In the same way that it's not okay to suffocate the kid or dehydrate them or starve them or deprive them, leave them out in the elements where they could die. Okay, that's the level of responsibility that psychological needs to be understood as. It's a fundamental, it's more basic than anything you're going to do to educate them. It comes first for all people responsible for children. So that's the thing, and that's why, and the same goes through any organization. If you have other people that you are dealing with, the only way to get the best out of them is to support their needs. So this is something that's pervasive. It needs to be understood as a pervasive responsibility of any organization. I focus on schools because that's my area of interest, and I think it's going to be a lot easier to sell it in terms of children than it is the adults. But let's start with the children because that's the easy case. But it's still not easy because, as you said, you want to communicate to politicians and you want to communicate to policymakers, you want to communicate to parents. They don't think about it that way. They have the breaker cultural infection that says, if I'm the adult, I get to tell them what to do by right and by, it's morally correct to tell them what to do for their own good, for their own safety. And it's like, that's not safe. That's not psychologically safe. You have to engage them. If you have the relationship that is so trusting that their autonomy will be supported by a decision you make, great, no problem. It is possible to tell kids what to do and have it be an okay thing. But that relies on a degree of relationship that most people, most teachers don't have with somebody else's children, not their own. It does occasionally happen, and I know it's been measured in an Asian society, in Hong Kong in particular, but I'd like to see follow-ups to that research to say, it does happen anywhere else. You know, are there teachers in America that have that kind of deep, abiding, related trust with their students such that they can just tell them what to do and they'll be fine with it from an autonomy perspective? That'd be cool to find out. It'd be cool to find out maybe culturally that's not possible. That'd be good to know, because then we can say there's certain contexts, there may be cultural contexts where adults telling children what to do are inherently unhealthy and not okay. I don't know because I don't have the data to find out. But I do have the data to know that some teachers have such a good relationship with their students, they can tell them what to do, and the kids will have no negative effects in their well-being. But it would be nice to find out more. So that's where the shift happens, is when you're trying to talk to politicians, understand that they're infected, understand your parents are infected, understand yourself, you are infected with breaker culture. It is a disease because it makes you harm yourself or other people because of the cultural patterns in breakerism make it so that you harm yourself or other people by taking the attitudes of a breaker. The Mender culture is the one in which, we're actually going to pay attention to autonomy, competence, relation, and all your needs and support those needs by default, not by exception. So that's where you have to understand it as a cultural infection. So it's hard to, just like an infection. I may have an infection in my lungs right now. That's why I have a little bit of a cough. I can't see it. I can't just decide it should go away. I have to do things. I have to take care of myself in other ways to make sure that it doesn't get worse. I have to be a little more restful. I've been trying to be a little more restful these days, although we are about to go out into the wilderness and camp. But I don't think that is a harmful thing. I think it actually might be a really good thing. I'll probably sleep in a little more and, be a little bit easier. We probably won't do strenuous hiking, but we'll see. So when you recognize somebody is sick, what do? You don't blame them. You don't criticize them for it, and you don't, you take care of them. You nurture them. You say, oh, okay, let's understand what this is. Oh, let's think about it. And that's why sharing the story, that's now it is the new edition of the manifesto. That is wait, did you get a copy of it at the conference?
I did.
Okay, good. So share that story with people, and then start to think about the conversations you can have. Like, okay, what if, particularly parents, can come in and have that understanding of their own process? Like, oh, okay, I understand. I want my kids. I want to nurture my kids. That's fundamentally my duty as a parent. But I need to expand my understanding of what that means. I need to understand autonomy is a need, and so what does that look like in our house? What does that look like for our family? And how do I nurture myself through this infection that I have that makes me thwart that need, or may tempt me to thwart that need, or whatever, to have this thought pattern that I should tell them what to do. Now, part of what the habit parents develop is because they knew those children when they were infants, because they're their parents. And so they need to start thinking about, well, am I infantilizing them? Am I doing too much for them or making decisions for them that they can start to make on their own? So that they can recognize for themselves that everything they're doing is the breaker culture. It's that you knew them when they were vulnerable and when they did have more needs. And the question is, how are you helping them, like, not have some of those needs anymore? How can you help them make better decisions? How can they have more autonomy and still have relatedness? And, like, can we, when they get to be teenagers, can we relate to them in a way where they won't alienate themselves from us, where they won't do hurtful things to us, where, like, yeah, they need to start recognizing, especially when they're teens, parents have a relatedness need just like they do. So is your treatment of us really, really positive? Like, is this how we want to relate to each other? Is this, like it can start opening up different kind of conversation when you start to want to discern what is developmentally necessary to help them make decisions, what is developmentally better for them to make. When do we start to make these transitions? And I think a lot of the way that democratic schools operate helps families have those conversations and sort of say, well, how do you handle dangerous things at your democratic school? A lot of schools have sort of certification processes. Like, okay, we're going to You want to use the knife in the kitchen? Well, then we need to train you on how to use them
Yeah.
safely, and how does that look? And so it when that is modeled of like, oh, okay, we just have conversations about these things in your school, it's being modeled, and then so when the family starts to say, oh, well, maybe we should have some conversations about these things, and what should be the conversation. So yeah, once again, it comes back to a form of structure. But,
Structure is
yeah,
not bad.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And that's
So,
what the story in here can provide, is another way of structuring the conversation. Oh, we're not talking about you being a bad parent. We're talking about you being, infected with a cultural pathogen that has you do things that may not be helpful for you or your kid. So what do we need to do to be caring and nurturing and help you through that? So hope that
so
helps.
thank you. Yeah, definitely. I have to look through my notes. I
Yeah.
was grabbing a bit. So yeah, it was really, really helpful.
Yeah, this was a fun
Ha-
conversation. So
Thank you, and hope you will get better. Sorry
yeah.
you used yeah your voice so much. So
All right.
hopefully we'll keep in touch, and
Yeah.
after
So
I try your tools.
yeah. So go in and look at the tools, and I can help you figure out how to use them a little bit. We can do some Zoom calls or things, screen sharing, to help refine
Yeah,
that or figure out how to use it. So yeah,
thank you.
definitely. All right,
Yeah,
well, I'll let you go now. Thank you very much. Take care.
bye. Bye.